Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon Gertzen, and we will be entering Theros. I'm back from my vacation and ready to record some more draft videos. And it's a new, exciting time. Just before the Pro Tour, we are going to experience firsthand how the new limited format plays and what is there to discover. There is a limited PDQ season going on if you want to qualify for Pro Tour Valencia, and the Pro Tour itself is going, of course, starting tomorrow, is going to be featuring Theros draft, which is going to be important for a long time. When Born of the Gods comes out, it's going to be following the regular 3-set cycle. Okay, how do we approach a new limited format like Theros? I think the fall is always the most exciting time of the year because everybody has played enough Core Set Limited to be wanting to experience something new and exciting, but it has also reset our minds from all the complicated mechanics we see in the expert sets. We don't have to worry about the 10 different mechanics of the Return to Ravnica block anymore, for example. And we can remember that apart from Slivers, M14 was a very basic, very standard set where every card just did what it said. Now, the big question for people trying to build sealed decks with Theros boosters or to build draft decks with Theros cards is how are games going to play out? How fast is the format? Is it going to be about 2 drops starting the aggression? Is it about 3 drops being the first place regularly? And of course, when do games end, or when are they virtually over? How do they end? Is it a race, or is it more of a two people fighting for dominance, and then the player that wins this struggle basically winning the game because of it? Well, there is some approaches where you look at the power and toughness of your creatures, maybe only the commons, maybe you try to see how the different colors stack up against each other. Some people try to analyze a new limited format by thinking about the archetypes, the 2-color combinations, maybe even the matchups. But I personally think that most of these things are either a little bit too complicated to see the big picture, or it's too early in the format to really do these things. Once the Pro Tour has once the Pro Tour is in the books, we can reconsider some of these things and see what the pros thought about these questions. For my very first encounter with a new expert set, I like to do a quick mechanic check, and that tells me quite a lot about the format and the set as a whole, especially because with the modern set design, the mechanics are made to be fun and engaging, but also be relevant and limited. So I'm not kidding you. What I actually do is I open up the MTG wiki and read the article about Theros, because there was always a nice part where it says themes and mechanics, so it's just going to list what mechanics are in Theros. So we have the enchantment theme, of course, with the gods. Then we have bestow as one of the big things, the aura creatures, if you want. Devotion is important, but more so at the higher rarity level. It's going to be important for certain archetypes, but it doesn't really change how games play out too much, except for like being firebolt out of the game. Then there is heroic, definitely next to bestow, the next most important ability, which we'll come to in a moment. Then there is scry, which works outside the battlefield, so it's closer to devotion than the other two, but it has a very particularly reason why it is in Theros, and I'll go through all of these. And then there is monstrosity. So the important abilities or keywords or mechanics for limited are definitely bestow, Heroic, Scry, and Monstrosity. And just from this page, from this single web page, we can already deduce quite a bit about the format. And that's because Wizards, or Wizards R&D, design and development, they want us to play the new cards. They want us to play the cool cards. They want us to play the cards with the new abilities, because that's what makes the new set exciting. So we already know that the designers of this set want us to bestow creatures onto others. They want us to trigger heroic, and they want us to make our creatures monstrous. Scrying is more of a development thing, because it's going to smooth out how games play out. But let's start with the big three, and I'm going to start with bestow. Now, let's see if this works. Bam. Of course, at common in Theros, there isn't too many bestow cards, but we can already see that each color has one or two bestow commons, and those are going to tell us quite a bit about the limited format. We see here that each bestow creature has a higher cost to play it as an aura, and we already know that it's going to stick around if the creature it's enchanting dies. Now, I can go to the uncommons and we'll see some more powerful bestow creatures. There's basically, I believe, an uncommon cycle, which is really good. So, what do these cards tell us? They tell us that the development team thinks that it's not unlikely that you'll hit a lot of mana. And that's when these cards with a double casting cost, with two alternative modes, shine. You can cast them for 4 mana if you want, but you can also wait until you have hit 6 mana, or later on in the game, if you have 6 or 7 mana, you might want to use the bestow ability, because in a sense, it is almost strictly better, especially when the game goes longer. Small creatures lose their value, and large creatures gain value. I've already dropped a hint here. When games go longer, when you hit the 6th land, when you hit the 7th land, now, can you envision a hyper-aggressive limited format where your cards are best once you've hit 6 mana? That doesn't make a lot of sense. If everybody is packing a lot of 2 and 3 drops and just trying to be as aggressive as possible, think Zendikar levels of aggressiveness, or M13, I believe, levels of aggressiveness. If that were the case, bestow creatures wouldn't make a lot of sense, because they are, well, except for some exceptions, I suppose, at least at the common level, they are really not great when cast for the regular mana. So we have comparably weak regular creatures, and the better effect when we reach a lot of mana. This is our first hint that a lot of mana is going to be important in this format, and that already tells us that it's not going to be a fast format. It's as easy as that. Now, the next point was, well, the next one was actually heroic, but I'm going to talk about monstrous first. Let's see if we can monstrous, if we can search for that just as easily. Most of these are more rare than others, and it's not that there are too many monsters in Theros, but some colors have more than others, and there is a couple of them in red, as you can see, a couple of them in green, especially with the commons. So every color has some amount of monstrosity. Now, okay, this is probably the best example. Colossus of Akros. Not that you should put this in every deck, but it has, until you reach 10 mana, it doesn't do anything. Now, look at a common like Nessian Asp. It's a 5 mana 4/5 reach. You get quite a lot of value for your 5 mana, but this snake turns into an 8/9 once you reach 7 mana. So each of these monstrosity cards is another example of how some mana gets you something, but more mana gets you a huge boost in utility, which equates to late game power. So Monstrosity is the prime example of a mechanic that rewards late game decks. It's similar to Kicker, where the card you start with has a nice effect that you might want to play because you're under some pressure, but if it were up to you, you would like to pay the Kicker cost, pay the Monstrosity cost on all your cards, simply because the reward is so large. So Bestow and Monstrosity teach us that having a lot of mana is not a bad thing. You won't be flooded, you won't be out aggroed, and you get rewarded for it. This is the important part to take with you. Now, let's think about Scry for a second. There is a bunch of Scry cards. You get to Scry all the time in all the colors. Blue has a lot of them. The other colors less, of course. It's distributed. You see blue and red have the lion's share, which does make sense, I suppose. How does Scry work? You get to pick which cards you want to draw, but you don't get extra cards. So you still have to earn your land drops and your high mana cost spells the hard way by just drawing them from your deck. However, you can scry additional lands to the bottom. Now, which decks need to do that, or which decks want to do that because they are prone to flooding? Well, it's decks with a lot of lands. And decks with a lot of lands tend to have a lot of expensive spells. So once again, we see Scry is a mechanic that smooths out a format in which a lot of lands and a lot of expensive cards are what defines the games. Wow, we've learned so much about this format from a Wikipedia article and some looking at comments. That's pretty amazing. Now, it does break down a little bit when we come to Heroic. I can't really say that Heroic is a mechanic that is meant to favor slow late game decks. It's definitely usable as an aggressive mechanic, and Heroic ties it all together. It means that there is aggressive starts that keep the slower decks fair, force them to keep it fair. It also means that Bestow has great synergy with a bunch of cards in the format. And last but not least, and this is where the longevity comes in again, it allows creatures like Phalanx Leader, like Wingsteed Rider, to be relevant for a larger portion of the game, which means that even if you are trying to be aggressive and trying to end the game as soon as possible, your cards with Heroic and their bonuses might still be able to take down a foe even if the game has progressed longer than you would have liked. So even Heroic is a mechanic that leads to aggressive decks finding their place in a slower format, if you want. Okay, with that said, I hope that this triggers at least something regarding how this affects how you should draft the format. Evaluating cards in the beginning of a format is always extremely difficult. You will not have played with most of them, especially the rarer ones, and having some of these guidelines is going to be super helpful. And by that, I'm not even saying that all of what I've said is 100% correct and set in stone, but just having these four mechanics in mind and what I believe them to be important for means that we can draft and play and reflect a lot more efficiently about what our cards are doing and what they maybe should be doing. And of course, it also allows us to see what our opponent might be up to a little more easily. Okay, this was quite the long intro, but I think we touched on a couple of interesting topics, even though we've only scratched the surface, really. I've decided to go back to intros rather than outros, rather than recap videos, and I hope you like this new opening discussion for Theros. I'll see if I can find some more interesting topics to talk about. For now, that was my intro to Theros. Enjoy the draft, enjoy the matches, and see you next time. Bye bye.